Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
I love your dress,
Thank you.
and it looks like we've already...
We pre-planned this.
We pre-planned this because I'm wearing bees and you're wearing flowers and I can pollinate you. So you've been doing Political Asylum.
Yeah, I started that with Matt in 2008, I think, 2009.
Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, so basically I started doing some shows at Trades Hall that were one-off political comedy events. So one of the big ones was based around the Obama election in 2008. And obviously Matt was always the other sort of main political comic around. And so we got together and decided that we would set up a room that was purely about political comedy. And then it developed into doing sort of tours and other shows and special events, and also encouraging the few people around that do specialise in political comedy to kind of work on that a bit more, and then other comics who don't do that to kind of give it a go as well.
Does political comedy come naturally, or is it something that you have to kind of decide on and then build up to and research?
I mean, it definitely is something you have to research. I have spent a lot of time over my career making sure I really understood things before I got up and said anything about them, just because I didn't want someone to be in the audience and be like, no, well, it's this, and then being like, oh, awkward, which has never happened. So I don't know whether I've necessarily always been right or just everyone's been like silently, that's not right, telling their friends. In terms of deciding to do it, it came pretty naturally to me. I grew up watching Good News Week. That's kind of what I always really loved watching when I was at high school, and that's kind of where I learnt the language of comedy. So it was kind of natural that I would then do that kind of comedy once I got started. And then luckily I got a job for a while working as a writer for Good News Week, so that was kind of ideal because that's what I'd always loved, and then I got to do that. So
like a dream job.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much totally my dream job. So that was really great.
That would have been really exciting.
It was very exciting.
What do you think is good fodder for political comedy?
It's a really interesting question. Naturally not good fodder, I suppose. I think it's kind of easy to go around it that way. In terms of, I think some things are just inherently ridiculous, and so they're already so ridiculous to then joke about it is kind of pointless. And then some things, there's a timing issue, so if it's like a tragedy of some kind, I think it's sometimes a bit difficult to work out when it's okay to make jokes about those things and when it's not. But otherwise, I think it's kind of anything is good for political comedy, I think. And I think the good thing about political comedy is you can kind of make anything political. So even like stories about footballers and the way they behave, it's socially political in some ways. And people don't necessarily think about it that way. Yeah, just if you can bring a new angle to it that makes people go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I think that's sort of the ideal, really.
So you mentioned having an angle. I've talked to Stella Young and Toby before, and I mean, Stella's obviously got a lot about her disability advocacy, and Toby talks a lot about homosexuality. Do you have a particular angle in your work?
Over the last few years, I've kind of come to talk more about gender issues, which I deliberately kind of didn't do in the start of my career, because I didn't want to be like girls talking about girl things. Like I was really, whereas now I've come to sort of understand a bit more about those kind of issues, and that's what my natural angle is. Like I already have an inherent understanding of that, and so it's kind of morphing my personal life with political in some ways. Only recently it's become a sort of gender-based thing, but I try to be pretty broad about what I do.
Do you think there's a link between political correctness and political comedy? I
think there's definitely a link, and it's definitely a consideration that people have when they're doing political comedy. But there's also people who just think political correctness is crap and they do political comedy as well. So like Jim Jeffries and other comedians who are more kind of right-wing, and some of the club comics as well talk about stuff that political correctness is just not on their radar at all, which is fair enough, you know, because some people, even audiences, feel that way as well, so they have to be entertained too. Only in the sense that I want to make sure the stuff that I write is not offensive to anyone that I am not. So I'm very privileged because I'm a white, blonde, middle class person, and so I have to be sure that if I'm writing satire, it's kicking upwards and not down. And I don't think that's necessarily what political correctness is. because political correctness is a term created by the right to make sort of consideration for other people sound, you know, like it's a control issue. Don't be a dick.
The exact same message from Stella.
That's a valid thing to think about all the time, not just like in your comedy or anything. That's just like, are you doing something that's dicky to somebody because of whatever and you haven't thought about it? Don't do that.
Can you generate social change from comedy?
What sort of definition of social change?
Well, you know, changing the world, making it a better place, making people aware of different issues.
I think you can definitely open people's minds to ideas that they haven't necessarily considered before. I think you can give people insights into stuff that they hadn't previously had. I think that's the wonderful part about comedy is because people are laughing at it, they're not thinking about the fact that they're thinking. When you laugh at something, there's a theory that you're laughing because your brain is making a leap from this concept and then you skip the middle one and then you're making it to the next one. And so I think in doing that, sometimes you take people to places where they go, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way before. And I think that's certainly a way that you can change people's minds about things. Comedy is not necessarily the first place you would go to do that. I think there are other ways to kind of make that progress in more tangible manners.
It's interesting that a lot of political comedy tends to be left-leaning. What do you think about that?
Right-leaning political comedy is very difficult to do. I did a show at the Comedy Festival in 2009, I think, which was a right-wing political comedy show, just as an experiment. The main problem is often right-wing ideas come from a place of trying to control and being interested in authority, as opposed to left-wing, which is more diverse and kind of interested in everyone taking part in it and breaking up that authority. So because the right wing wants to be in the position of power and power is so important, that's inherently not funny.
What are some current issues that you would probably talk about in terms of comedy?
Certainly the asylum seeker issue. Today is the 12th anniversary of the Sea of X asylum seeker boat with all the people that died trying to come to Australia. So that's certainly very topical, and the Abbott government bringing back temporary protection visas, hilarious. I think the Abbott government has a lot of things that are pretty good to take the piss out of. It's kind of you feel like a real split when they won. I was like horrified, and then professionally kind of like, well,
It's really good for me.
Yeah, well, more work, definitely those things, and because now we have Liberal governments all across the state and federal. There's lots of things to talk about all the time that are just waiting to fall apart.